When you think of the American Southwest, what comes to mind? Probably these huge deserts, incredible sunsets, and those amazing red rock canyons, right? It's a stunningly beautiful landscape, but wow, is it a challenging one. And for thousands of years, this has been home to some really advanced indigenous civilizations. Today, we're going to dive into how they didn't just survive out here, they absolutely thrived.
Okay, let's just jump right in, because that's really the million-dollar question. How on earth do you build lasting communities when you're up against some of the toughest conditions imaginable? Well, the story of the Pueblo, Navajo, and Hopi peoples is basically a masterclass in human ingenuity. So let's really set the scene here. The environment itself was the biggest hurdle. I mean, you've got blistering summer heat, you've got freezing cold winters, and water is just incredibly hard to come by. So surviving here wasn't just about being tough, it was about being unbelievably smart and innovative.
All right, first up, let's talk about the Pueblo peoples. Now, this is kind of an umbrella term for a few different groups, like the Zuni and Acoma, and they're all famous for building these amazing permanent towns and for having this incredibly deep connection to the land they've called home for centuries.
So what was their secret weapon? Adobe. Seriously, think about it. You're in a place with very few trees for lumber, so what do? You turn to the earth itself. They figured out how to mix mud and straw, let it bake in the hot sun, and bam! They had these super durable, insulating bricks, perfect for building everything from a single-family home to an entire village. And you can just see how they tackled every single problem. So, you need defense? No problem. We'll just build our entire community straight into the side of a canyon wall. That's how we get the famous cliff dwellings. The climate's too dry? Okay, we'll engineer these really complex irrigation systems. And for building materials, like we said, they used the ground beneath their feet and mastered adobe. You know, their genius in farming is perfectly summed up in this idea of the three sisters. This is so cool. They didn't just plant crops side by side. They planted a whole cooperative ecosystem. The corn gives the beans a stalk to climb. The beans in turn put nitrogen back into the soil, which helps the corn. And then the big squash leaves spread out on the ground, creating shade that keeps the soil moist. It's just a brilliant, sustainable system.
Okay, so now let's shift gears and talk about the Navajo, or the Dine as they call themselves. They came to the Southwest a bit later than the Pueblo peoples, and they developed this really distinct culture that was all about family, being able to move around, and just incredible craftsmanship. The absolute heart of the Navajo world is the hogan, and this is so much more than just a shelter. It's a sacred space. It's built from logs and earth, and the single doorway always faces east. Why? To greet the morning sun and to keep a sense of harmony and balance with the world around them.
And you can totally see how their whole culture was shaped by this lifestyle. Everything revolved around the family hogan. Their main livelihood was herding sheep, which gave them food and wool. And that wool, well, that became the key ingredient for their world-famous art. These absolutely breathtaking, intricate woven blankets and rugs.
Now for our third group, the Hopi. And get this, they have one of the oldest, unbroken cultures in all of North America. For more than 1,000 years, they've lived in this totally unique, dramatic landscape, and they've mastered the art of farming in the high desert.
They built their communities on top of mesas. We're talking these huge, flat-topped cliffs. And this was a genius move. For one, it gave them incredible natural defense, but it also gave them this really deep spiritual connection to the sky and the earth. I mean, living on a mesa meant your life was literally suspended between the desert floor and that vast sky.
The Hopi became total experts at something called dry farming, creating special ways to grow corn with very little water. And they kept their culture alive through really powerful traditions, like the Kachina ceremonies. These are these complex, amazing rituals where dancers actually embody ancestral spirits to help bring rain, good crops, and a sense of harmony to the whole community.
So you take all this incredible resilience, this deep connection to the land, and what grows out of it? These rich, totally distinct artistic traditions that are now famous all over the world. And you gotta remember, this art wasn't just for decoration. It was a huge part of their culture and their everyday life.
So let's just compare two of the most famous forms here. On one hand, you've got Pueblo pottery, which is famous for its super detailed geometric designs. They'd shape it from local clay and use it for everything from storing food to sacred ceremonies. Then, on the other hand, you have that incredible Navajo weaving, turning sheep's wool into these textiles with unbelievably rich colors and patterns, making art you could actually use, like blankets and rugs.
But, for all their unique qualities, what's really amazing is what they all have in common. All three of these groups have this deep, foundational respect for the land and for water, Community is everything. Stories are how you pass down history and values, and ceremonies are absolutely essential for keeping that balance with the natural world.
And this next part is maybe the most important thing to remember. This isn't just ancient history. We are not talking about cultures that have vanished. Their legacy is vibrant and it's alive right now.
Literally right now, today, these nations are thriving communities in the American Southwest. Their languages are still being spoken, their ceremonies are still practiced, and their incredible art is still being created, carrying on a legacy of strength and creativity that has lasted for centuries.
So, looking at the history of these civilizations kind of leaves us with a pretty big question for our own time. In a world that's facing its own massive environmental challenges, what can we learn from cultures that built their entire way of life on cooperating with and having a deep respect for the natural world? It's definitely something to think about.